board members and city staff, I do believe we are ready to get started. I will let Jared Nolly in. He is our public participant this evening. And just for everybody's knowledge, Mr. Watts did ask for a link to the meeting. We sent him one, but he is not logged in yet. If he does log in, then I will send Tanya a note and let her know that he is on the meeting.
Thank you.
Okay, Madam Chair, we're ready to begin whenever you are.
Okay, very good. Brandon, before we get started, would you read the information regarding the current COVID-19 pandemic? Yes,
I'd be happy to. Thank you, Madam Chair. So I will go over the guidelines for our modified meeting procedures. And we do this to ensure that we are complying with the Kansas Open Meeting Act during the COVID-19 pandemic. Board members and other meeting participants must state their name and titles each time they speak. And I will try to remind you through the meeting to do that every time you speak, even in conversation. Various members of city staff are present via Zoom and in person in attendance. Lieutenant Ernst and myself are in the room on behalf of city staff. We must also state our names and titles each time we speak. All motions will need to be stated clearly, and after a motion is made and seconded, the chair will call on board members individually to provide their vote. The chair will then announce whether or not the motion carried, as well as provide a count of the vote. The agenda for this meeting provided instructions for how to submit public comment and how it would be handled in the meeting. Written public comment should be received by the posted deadline, and we did receive public comment from 2 members of the public. The chair will call for in-person public comment for those without access to technology options, and those folks would be in attendance here in person. And the staff present will direct anybody in person attending the meeting to the podium to speak, and we'll ask them to follow social distancing requirements and safety protocols. And again, I want to remind everybody to please speak clearly. Don't forget to state your name and your position, and make sure you are muted when you're not speaking.
Very good, thank you. Welcome, everyone. I think we'll go ahead and get started with item A on the agenda. That's approve the minutes. Do I hear a motion?
Sanjay Mishra, board member, motion.
A motion to approve the minutes made by Sanjay. Is there a second?
Stephanie Littleton, board member. I second the motion.
Okay, a motion by Sanjay and a second by Stephanie. And all those in favor signify with aye. Jane? Board member Jane?
Aye.
Board member Marie?
Aye.
Board member Jennifer?
Aye.
Board member Bill?
Aye.
Board member Stephanie?
Aye.
Board member Sanjay?
Aye.
And board member Salvini? I vote aye. The motion passes. That would be 7 approving, 0 disapproving. Thank you all. Next, we're moving to item number B, public comment. Stephanie Littleton, as vice chair, would you please take this agenda item?
I will, thank you. This is Stephanie Littleton, board member. I will be addressing tonight's public comments. So I'll first read the public statement. The public is allowed to speak at public comment after first being recognized by the vice chair or the chair, except that any complaints or comments regarding individually identifiable officers are not allowed. Excuse me. Rather, any such comments or complaints may be provided to the board in writing, and the board will forward such comment or complaint to the appropriate person within the Lawrence Police Department. The board may establish reasonable limitations on the allowable length of public comment. As a general practice, the board will not discuss or debate these items, nor will it make decisions on items presented during this time. Additionally, the public is allowed to speak to any items or issues except those scheduled for discussion on the agenda. Individuals wishing to provide live public comment must register as outlined at the top of the agenda, and public comment is limited to 3 minutes. Now, Brandon, if I understand, Mr. Watts has not joined us?
That is correct. This is Brandon McGuire.
Okay, all right. And I understand Mr. Jared Nally has joined us. I do see him on. Mr. Nally, I'm going to give you the floor to speak and just remind you that you do have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Ayacheki Jared Wenzuiani Nila Miamia. Hi everyone, my name is Jared Nally. I'm a community member for Lawrence, and I am part of Miami Tribe of Oklahoma, and I am a mixed race individual at Haskell Indian Nations University. My public comment is regarding board member Tanya Salvini, who in her capacity as a public figure for Haskell has ignored comments to get my multiracial status acknowledged for the census. Those comments are reflected in a letter in the communications tab on the agenda, which I will direct the board members to review. I will note that not in that letter, I would also draw attention to the fact that the Order 9324 that you guys are discussing today, you're looking to include a section for candidates to demonstrate ability to be fair, impartial, and unbiased, and have an absence of any real or perceived bias, prejudice, or conflicts of interest. So those are being presented as infringements of my racial rights and being marginalized in that community, and me not wanting to have those violations extend into this board. I would also like to draw attention that I had an earworm at the time of writing the letter, and I did misidentify Tanya Salvini as Vice President of Academic Affairs in the letter, which is incorrect. Tanya Salvini serves as Vice President of University Services, which oversees admissions, financial aid, registrar, mail center, student affairs, student services, student rights, facilities management, student life, and student services, all which cannot track racial bias and mistreatment because the university does not record any sort of racial identity other than Native, which is untrue for many of our students. That is recorded in Appendix A in my letter that shows how Haskell reports students as 100% Native, and the fact that none of the academic material records any record of racial identity for students. With that, I believe I will just direct everyone to that letter.
Mr. Nally, I appreciate your time and efforts coming forward. Appreciate the written document, the correction of facts and such. So we appreciate your time. Thank you.
No.
Yes, sir. Board member Stephen Littleton again. I'm going to move forward at this moment, since my understanding is Stephen Watts has not joined us.
Board member Marie Taylor, can I ask a question related to public comments? And I guess it's more for City Attorney Tony Wheeler. Is there a process for filing ethics complaints? I don't see, and I looked through our bylaws and I didn't see a process where we would be able to accept those, or whether we should be forwarding them on to another office.
City Attorney Tony Wheeler. That is correct. That this board would not review a complaint against a board member, that could be directed to the city manager's office if there was a desire to have that looked at.
As a follow-up question, this is Marie Taylor, follow-up question, but an individual could do that themselves. It doesn't have to be our board who does that, right? It's independent of any receipt of a complaint.
City Attorney Tony Wheeler, that is correct. The board would not have to take any action. The individual person could do that on their own.
Marie Taylor, thank you for that clarification.
Thanks, Marie. This is Stephanie Littleton, board member. Does anybody else have any further comments before we move on the agenda? Okay, great. Then we're going to move on, as shows next on the list is for the agenda items for discussion of the ordinance. I do want to kind of clarify, if I may, under that we have A, B, and C that we're going to be communicating about. I would like that if we would start with the presentation by Lieutenant Ernst regarding the complaints, so we can kind of get the idea of the breadth of the complaints before we move into the ordinance and further discuss. So if everybody's in agreement with that, I'd like to move forward with Lieutenant Ernst to do that.
Marie Taylor, board member, would it be all right to also take out of order the subcommittee report and just have that handled as well? It's sort of administerial. It was added late, so it probably would have been somewhere earlier in the agenda, if that's possible as well, just to have that settled.
Board member Stephanie Littleton, we actually wanted to try to move to your question, Marie. We wanted to kind of move with the most importance to the discussion of the ordinance, so we can get enough time to walk through that, because we're going to have quite a bit to go through. Not that obviously the work of that subcommittee is any less important, but we really wanted to kind of walk through and give as much time, and then hoping at the end that we can actually hear on that, if that's okay.
Okay, board member Marie Taylor. So that's fine. If there's not enough time, it could be moved to another agenda for the following month.
Yeah, hopefully we won't have to do that. So just want to make sure we can get through the ordinance.
Right. Stephanie, this is board member Chair Salvini, and I want to reiterate that hopefully we have enough time to go ahead and have a report from the subcommittee for sure. But I think where we're moving to, and where I hope we can land this evening, is really to honor the work that everyone's done to get to a point where we have a workable draft of an ordinance, that we can create a community engagement plan, so we can move forward on that. And so I think that was the hope in putting the agenda together. And again, to allow time to discuss the subcommittee report.
Yeah,
okay.
Sorry, board member Littleton, I'm completely in agreement. Tanya, going through the complaints and then getting into the kind of the meat, so to speak, of the ordinance, and kind of walking through the sections, if possible, and see where we can kind of maybe land together by the end of the evening.
This is Tanya Salvini. I agree. And I would also like to suggest to the group that as we're walking through everyone's work, and as we're putting together, working toward a final draft, I'd like us to consider really thinking about intent really strongly, and making our intent the most important and valuable kind of focus, because we can refer the verbiage with our clear intent to the staff to put into ordinance language. for us, but arriving at that intent, I think, is real important this evening as well when we're working in and dovetailing in, all the different documents that we have before us.
This is Board Member Stephanie Littleton. Just to kind of add to that, Tanya, for further clarification, kind of the thinking of the way we wanted to kind of present this evening to move on the ordinance is, once again, have Lieutenant Ernst talk about the breadth of the complaints, and then move to the working document. Now, with that being said, working from that working document from the original subcommittee with taking into consideration the city attorney staff memo. That's why we've got that attached as well, in addition to Marie's proposed alternative. So we're going to kind of work between those three, but primarily off of the working document and then going from section to section. With making the most sense to begin with from the purpose of the board of talking about the scope first and foremost, and then moving from there. So just kind of get clarity how we're going to kind of flow. All right.
Absolutely. And so I want to make it clear that at least for starting that discussion, I would like the original members of that work group, and that was board members Stephanie, Jane, and Bill, to go ahead and start that process and then work through discussion with the whole group to refer to the documents at the appropriate sections. So Stephanie, if you'll walk us through that, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, well, this board member, Stephanie Littleton, if we may start with Lieutenant Ernst with the complaints, can we do that first and get an understanding, so understand the volume?
Yes, that's great. Is everyone in agreement with that?
See some heads nodding, a thumbs up. Okay, let's go ahead and proceed then. Sergeant Ernst?
Hello, I'm here, Lieutenant Dave Ernst. I think the camera will pan to me at some point. We'll kind of wait. There we go. I'm here, promise. I had prepared the report responsive to Board Member Taylor's request, and then Board Member Littleton had contacted me and asked for some clarifying information or additional, however you wanted to put it, but the information requested was how many of those personnel investigations annually were citizen complaints, and then how many of the personnel investigations annually were bias-based policing complaints, and then also just the identical information on this current calendar year. And so just looking back, and I'll provide the information to you, and frankly, I didn't know whether to provide it verbally here, obviously I'm going to, or to amend the memo, but I figured this is the easiest way, so I apologize if this is a little bit inconvenient, and it was just poor judgment on my part. But so for 2017, of the 13 personnel investigations, 7 of those were generated by citizens, and then 2 of those were bias-based policing complaints. And then for 2018, of the 16 personnel investigations, 4 of those were generated by citizens, and 1 of those was a bias-based policing complaint. In 2019, of the 9 personnel investigations, 4 of them were generated by citizen complaints, and there were 0 bias-based policing complaints. And then currently for calendar year 2020, we actually have 4 personnel investigations. 2 of those have been generated by citizens, and none of those are bias-based policing complaints. Go ahead. I see Board Member Robinson raising her hand. I assume the question's for me.
Yes, I have a question for you. Jenny Robinson, board member. Can you remind me how complaints are classified as bias-based? Does it have to be citizen, like does a citizen have to identify it as bias-based policing, or is that determined some other way?
I guess in the simplest answer is yes. In my time in recent history, that we've not had it where an employee has identified some sort of bias-based policing, but that could also be possible. Or you could be investigating a a different type of topic, let's say use of force or some other sort of misconduct, and identify that. But typically what spurns or where it's titled as a bias-based policing is somebody calls and says, this officer interacted with me and I believe it was because of, and it would be one of the protected classes. Board Member Taylor.
Board Member Marie Taylor, when you say on your document contacts, is that what you mean by complaints? Like, what does context mean to you? Is that the same as a complaint?
Is really is a very broad statement. It could consist of a complaint, a compliment, or just in sort of general, I think I put in there a general inquiry. It's just somebody calling down to the Office of Professional Accountability with a question. It could be somebody calling to complain and say, hey, this officer used excessive force, or hey, this officer put some incorrect information on my accident report, or hey, this officer, I have not heard back from them. I've tried calling them, not heard back from me. And so of these, and actually, believe it or not, we do get compliments from time to time as well. So, but then of these contacts, based on the nature of the allegation, it could generate a personnel investigation.
Okay, so complaint does not equal personnel investigation for you. So
no, it does not. No, ma'am.
So there's no way we can know whether you're talking about 52 complaints that would have to be reviewed, or you're talking about 13. Already by the time you get to the number 13, you've done some sort of analysis that distinguishes how you'll treat that, whatever you've decided is a complaint. I mean, the complaint is itself a very broad term.
I guess I've heard what you said, and I would agree with you that complaint is a broad term. And even somebody complaining, an example I use commonly is we had a citizen one time complaining that an officer asked a question during a stolen vehicle investigation about a vehicle being repoed. And so the citizen was complaining that the officer asked that question, even though that would be a reasonable line of questioning during that type of investigation. And so to get to your, I think, question of, just because somebody calls and complains about something, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're complaining about a violation of policy, or something of in kind of low level, whether it be rudeness or a failing to follow up, or just general kind of lack of communication. That would not generate a personnel investigation. And I apologize if I've not answered your question. I promise I'm trying.
So, Board Member Marie Taylor again. So, someone has to make a value judgment about how that information that comes in, the contact comes in, when it becomes considered a complaint. And so it's very unclear to me who makes that decision. And if not, do those all get rolled in through your office anyway and are, in a sense, all treated like complaints until you've filtered out how to handle it?
No, not all complaints come through the Office of Professional Accountability. Only allegations of, if a complaint comes in on patrol and it's deemed to be a potential serious policy violation, then it would be rolled over to the Office of Professional Accountability. But not all complaints that come into patrol supervisors are then forwarded to the Office of Professional Accountability. And as far as value judgment there is, of course, discretion amongst the frontline supervision, the employee taking the complaints and Officer of Professional Accountability, but also many of times it is not just the employee receiving the complaint, but they're speaking with their superior up to and including the police chief. I've seen a few hands. I think Dr. Gibson was next.
Thank you, Jane Gibson, board member. These were a lot of my questions also, but let me just, I want to just be clear. I would like for you to be clear with me because I'm a little bit muddled about how we're deciding what is a bias-based complaint, especially because one, I thought the complaints had to be in writing, and now I'm hearing you say that people can call up and that will trigger an investigation. Is that true?
So, and this even kind of goes back to when we originally formed the board. I said, we will accept complaints in all form. Is it preferred that somebody would put their grievance in writing? Yes. And that really is even benefit to the investigator or the administration, kind of saying, hey, we have this person put it, that's taken the time to write this down. But that is not a requirement. We will accept complaints in all form. And to rehash the bias-based policing, it would involve somebody saying, hey, you know, the officer contacted me or the officer arrested me, and I feel like they did it because of, and they will then, you know, the protected classes that are identified in the bias-based policing ordinance.
So,
Okay, you arrested me, this officer arrested me not because of the merits of the arrest, they arrested me because I'm a female. And so that would be then a bias-based policing complaint.
okay, so you do rely then, this is Jane Gibson, board member again, you do rely exclusively in your determination of what constitutes a bias-based complaint on the determination by the complainant that the alleged misconduct is based on bias, right? I mean, there is never an occasion, if I understood you correctly, that the police would themselves receive a complaint and unilaterally decide, well, this looks like bias, even if the complainant didn't call it bias.
No, that definitely could be a possibility. And during my time in the office, it did not occur, but I'm not saying that would definitely be in the realm of possibility. It would be, it would definitely be possible.
And if that happens,
Sanjay? Oh,
Speaking in generalities about complaints,
Go ahead,
and
Jay.
I apologize, this is Lieutenant David Ernst. In complaints, is somebody could call, and it's just even in similar to somebody filing a police report. And so somebody calls and says, hey, I want to file a complaint on this, or I want to file a police report on this. And then based on the fact pattern and or where the investigation takes the investigator, it could determine different policy violations or almost different umbrellas or titles that the complaint could then have. You know, somebody could call in a use of force complaint, and during the investigation, we've determined some other policy violation unrelated to use of force. So then that's also a part of the investigation. Does that make sense?
yes, thank you. Jane Gibson, board member. So a complaint that is considered bias-based can arise either because is it the OPA or whoever takes the call determines that it is bias-based, or the complainant determines it's bias-based. So
yes.
it can arise either way.
Yes, it's most common that the complainant is stating it. In my time, it's not been identified, and I don't want to try to make up some sort of fact pattern that might cause that. But while investigating any sort of policy violation, it is possible to identify other policy violations, which could include racial or other bias-based policing.
Okay, and when you are determining this looks like bias to you, is it that you look to the categories that are in the ordinance now, and if the person fits in one of those categories, that's a possibility. But if a person does not fit inside those categories, that is not going to be considered even potentially a bias-based action. Is that right?
So, and typically,
a protected class person, is that right?
I'm not saying it has to be, but just typically in my time in the office, it has fallen under those categories. I've not had one, and I'm just going off my memory, but I've not had one where I've thought, oh, I better look at the ordinance or the state statute, and it doesn't meet those criteria.
Yes, thank you. That answers my questions. I appreciate it, Sergeant Ernst. Thank you.
yeah. Thank you. Yes, Sanjay, I think you had your hand up, and then Jenny.
Yes. So I just have a clarification question. At the end of the conversation the citizen has with the OPA, do they know that a complaint was registered and if it's bias-based?
So that's kind of a two-part question. One is just, does somebody know if a complaint is registered? And so when interacting, and I can only speak for what I assume, at the patrol level, if a patrol supervisor is taking a complaint, they're very clear on the outcome of what's going to occur. I can speak with my own personal experience in OPA is I will receive the information and provide the next steps, so it's very clear what is going to occur. So then, as far as your part about bias-based policing, is with any complaint, when somebody calls and provides a fact pattern to me or a statement to me, I will repeat back to them, okay, so I understand your concern is this. So if it is bias-based policing, I will repeat that back to them and saying, I hear that you're stating to me you were stopped, you were issued a citation, and you believe that this officer conducted themselves or did this based on your whatever, race or gender or whatever. So it's clear what the outcome is going to be, but then also what sort of the soul, have repeated back what I believe the core of their complaint to be. And it could, if that's what it is, it would be bias-based policing, yes.
Okay, thank you. Last clarification, Sanjay Mishra, board member. It's a comment maybe. I just wanted to clarify that the citizen gets enough feedback to know so that there is some validity to these numbers that you've shared with us. Because I don't want us to go out into the community and say, look, I complained so many times and I'm not seeing those numbers because somebody made a value judgment, which decides that this complaint or this comment is not worthy of going into a bias-based or a complaint setup. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sanjay. Jenny, if you don't mind, just real quickly, I wanted to dovetail in here. Marie, I want to go back to your question earlier because I think you were getting at some of this, and it is that when a complaint does come in, perhaps what is the screening criteria or what is the screening process that determines, what type of complaint it is and then how it's to be handled? Would that, is that what I'm hearing that you were asking earlier? Mm-hmm.
Right. And part of this is, Marie Taylor, board member, is that if part of what the board is looking at is expanding its role to look at all complaints, what's the universe we're talking about? Are we talking about, if there's no screening in place, we're talking about 60? Are we talking about, some other screening that happens before it even would get to the board? So I'm just trying to get a handle of what we're talking about in terms of complaints.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that from your earlier question. Thank you. Okay, Jenny? And then Steph.
Jenny Robinson, board member. So I have two questions. So we had proposed changing our wording in the ordinance to include the protected class of socioeconomic status. And I wanted to clarify, would you use our list of protected classes as, essentially to decide if something was a bias-based policing encounter, or is that a separate wording that you would use?
And if I'm not, Lieutenant David Ernst, if I'm not mistaken, currently the ordinance mirrors state statute. And so, of course, the ordinance, and I'm probably, the answer would be yes. So if our ordinance had some other sort of protected class identified, yes.
So if the Community Police Review Board's ordinance had an additional protected class, you would consider that?
And I don't want to get too much into the legal thing because I'm not an attorney, but if bias-based policing and a new protected class was defined under there, then yes. If that's part of the bias-based policing definition, then yes.
Okay. And just one more question. I feel like we're grilling you, really.
Oh, no, that's fine.
So I'm wondering about if there is a standardized protocol for essentially a standardization of complaints. So you receive a phone call. Is there a form that you type into and submit it? You receive a written complaint. Do you put that into a standardized form? How do you track this?
So for the Office of Professional Accountability, it's tracked via spreadsheet. We are working on a grander tracking system that would encompass all of patrol and the Office of Professional Accountability. So admittedly, we probably have, when I say a lackluster tracking on our patrol, it only tracks the negative. Meaning if somebody calls in and complains about something, whether, some sort of performance issue, such as an officer didn't follow up on my case or I haven't heard back from them. And if it's something where the officer, they should have done better. Let's say they should have followed up on the case. That could be entered into their personnel file. So the negatives are the negatives are documented, but not everyone. And we've had a recent command staff transition, and I've recommended that we do track all. With that being said, we're working on a new software system called IA Pro, and that ideally is going to track all these contacts, but all complaints. And I'm assuming then too, we can even have them categorized in the sense of where what I want to say, getting better data. And so we could have complaints fall under topics, et cetera. And then we can basically say, hey, all these, we have so many complaints about rudeness or so many complaints about incorrect information on a report or whatever. So the new software system is currently being worked on. We're working on acquiring that.
Jenny Robinson, board member, just follow up. What's the timeline on that? Do you know?
I believe there's a presentation to the command staff by the end of the year. I'm going to say December, but don't quote me on that. So, but any other timeline beyond that, I don't, as far as the implementation, I do not know.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, this is board member Tanya, Stephanie Littleton, and then board member Jane Gibson.
Okay, this board member, Stephanie Littleton, just real quick, Lieutenant Ernst, just for clarification for all of us so we understand on the number on the complaints. So going back to, let me look at some numbers. Just to clarify, so when you say, for example, 2017, there were 13 personnel investigations, 7 were community complaints, 2 were bias-based. So for the purposes of this board, and this is just, I'm putting this out here, if we were to go to a narrow scope, we would be looking strictly at the bias base, if I'm following that right. So if we would look at the broad scope, we would be considering strictly, I'm assuming, the community complaint minus what internal is rolled into that number. Does that make sense to your numbers, Lieutenant?
Well, Lieutenant David Ernst, making sense, that would be up to the board about the scope of review or the scope of review that you folks are desiring. But so yes, for 2017, there was 13 total personnel investigations. 7 of them were citizen generated and 6 were internally generated. And of the 7 citizen complaints in that year, 2 of them, the topic was bias-based policing.
Oh, okay, I got you. Okay, so but take out, I'm sorry, this board member Littleton. So take out the community complaints, bias-based, the rest is internal. I think that's just kind of what I wanted to clarify. The rest are internal.
Yes.
Okay. All right. I just wanted, so for all of us to have an idea of the scope of the number of complaints. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, board member Jane Gibson.
Thank you, board member Gibson. I didn't actually understand the answer to Sanjay's question. He asked if the citizen is aware whether or not his complaint will be investigated. And I thought you said something like you restate the complaint back to the complainant. But is there a moment when that person receives some acknowledgement that the complaint will be investigated?
So, Lieutenant David Ernst, I apologize if I wasn't clear. They're verbally stated, and then I will advise a timeline, like you will hear some information back, and depending upon the nature of the complaint, whether it be a week or 2 weeks, but ultimately a letter from the chief is received after the disposition is rendered. So at the time, what I was trying to articulate, and I apologize, is more identifying what their complaint is, and then the expected outcome, telling them what the department is going to do.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Board member Marie Taylor.
Board member Taylor. So I'm struggling with the value of this information, honestly, because there's no way to know how you get from being a contact to a personnel investigation, how that determination happens. And so I can't say for sure that this tells us fully what it means to look at all the complaints.
Lieutenant David Ernst, I took that more as a statement, just a couple points of clarification. So as our current policy stands, any allegations of violations of the use of force policy or the pursuit policy would be investigated by OPA. I believe in our previous OPA policy, it stated, but I can tell you that department practice has always been that bias-based policing complaints would be investigated by the Office of Professional Accountability. And I don't have the wording in front of me, so I apologize, but then it does state kind of about, when I say a low level, and I don't mean it like it sounds, but rudeness, et cetera, would be handled generally by a employee's frontline supervisor And then allegations of serious policy violations would be investigated by OPA. I'm not alleging that what I've stated is just going to bring you an aha moment of clarity, but at least letting you know the realm we're currently operating in.
Board Member Marie Taylor, so you're saying that there's when it's a certain type of complaint, then it's presumed to be of significance and then automatically investigated?
Yes, the policy currently states, Lieutenant David Ernst, sorry, I'm getting used to this, stating my name first. The policy currently states the use of force, an allegation of a violation of the use of force policy and the pursuit policy. But I want to be very clear, that does not mean that other alleged policy violations cannot be investigated by the Office of Professional Accountability.
Thank you. Board Member Salvini is calling on Jenny Robinson.
Jenny Robinson, board member. I would like to say that I agree with board member Marie Taylor. And I want to add that I feel like without a standardized process for collecting complaints and tracking those and, notifying complainants of, the process and what it's going through, it seems to be very difficult to move forward in a meaningful way. And also I want to say that putting the burden on the complainant to identify a bias-based policing encounter or putting the burden on the police department to identify that, it seems like you would likely to be undercounting and under-identifying those encounters. And that was a statement.
Okay. Jenny, this is Chair Salvini. I'm going to pick up a little bit on what you said there too, in terms of the burden. So I'm going back to the screening thing, because to me, if there was a really sound screening mechanism that had no bias whatsoever, but the narrative of the complaint itself, and maybe some training on understanding how those complaints are written, could lend itself to some non-biased screening mechanisms. Would that be? Yes, Jenny.
I mean, as Jenny Robinson, board member, as we're talking about this, I'm thinking of the way we submit tickets to our IT department at work. We submit them under a certain subject and we get an email back saying this is being looked at. Here are the next steps. That's what I'm thinking of. And that's so easy to track all of those. And I know this is, a larger issue than that, but this comes down to getting the data that we need, and it just doesn't seem like there's a straightforward way to do that at the moment.
Okay. Let's consider this when we're thinking about where that is mentioned in the ordinance then, so we can move forward on working on the final draft of the ordinance. Is everyone in agreement with that? Jane Gibson.
How the police track these complaints and determine which ones will be investigated and which are bias-based is an important matter for us, as you've all pointed out, about tracking data. But it seems to me this is a policy matter, and it's something that we should work with the police and make a solid recommendation to try to improve that tracking process. It's clear from Sergeant Ernst's comments that they want to have a good system that helps them to track, because they need the information as much as we do. So it's not something that we fix in an ordinance. It's something that we recommend that they fix in their policies. That's all I'm saying is that's not tonight's subject.
Thank you, Board Member Jane Gibson. That's a good point. Is everyone ready to move forward on the ordinance work then? Okay, if I can turn this over to Vice Chair Stephanie Littleton. Go ahead and begin the process.
This is Board Member Stephanie Littleton. I'd like to start with, if we would just start from the very top of the CPRB working document. And I'm kind of making a little bit of an opening, if I may, from our last meeting and earlier discussion on the working document and some of the feedbacks. Because basically we're going to start with the purpose of the board at section 12502 and the scope of the complaint review process. So going back to the working group, so we previously, as you all know, we brought forward potential changes to the ordinance in this revision that would broaden the complaints handled by the board beyond racial and other bias-based complaints. So basically that revision would expand the board scope to also include excessive use of force and other types of misconduct complaints. On the flip side, we've had some suggestions from the board as well to narrow basically the scope back to just keeping the oversight onto the racial or other bias-based complaints. So I just kind of want to put forward, so this, as we know, this is where we kind of are at. So when we move forward, I think the first thing and most thing that we need to talk about is the scope of the purpose of the board, and just start there at 12502. So I can kind of open that up how we wish to begin that discussion.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. This is Chair Salvini. I'm calling on Marie Taylor.
Marie Taylor, board member. I just wanted to note that I had put in a presentation on my alternative ordinance. It was attached as a PowerPoint. And so I'm assuming that either you all did not look at that at all, or you've decided to roll all A, B, and C into one discussion. So I don't know if you did not notice that I had done that, or and that's just a decision you made not to have me go through my proposal, or just to have that stand on its own and we just lay out that we just proceed as you've laid out.
Okay, I see board member Bill, and then we'll go back to Stephanie. Bill?
In answer to Ms. Taylor's comments, I would suggest that we begin going through the work committee's proposal, and if there are sections of that proposal that are different than what board member Taylor has proposed, that she submit that as an amendment to the work group's original proposal. We can discuss those as we go through, vote them up or vote them down, and finally end up with a document. We've been at this for 2 years. Mm-hmm. There's 3 professors at least, 2 lawyers, a veteran police officer, and a college administrator. Surely we can get something done in 2 years. So I think we need to put some kind of framework to it. My suggestion is we start with the work group's proposal. If Ms. Taylor or anybody else wants to amend that, offer an amendment to it as we go through it. And
okay, thank you, Bill.
That's my proposal.
This is Chair Salvini. I'm moving to Stephanie Littleton.
This is board member Stephanie Littleton. I do agree with Bill, but I do want to make a comment that Marie, I did read all of your proposed alternative draft. I think it was very well laid out. It was very much easier to read this, and I read through what you previously provided, but this laid it out really clearly. So I do appreciate this. I think what we're wanting to do is to kind of take because we did this initial draft, and then to Bill's point is to make an amendment, but we're going to, as we go through each section, we're going to address, and I've kind of made my own points as well, along with the table that's attached, put together from the last meeting that kind of compares some of the recommendations from the board from that last meeting to what our ordinance is. So we have a lot. We're not going to leave any of that out. It's just a way we're kind of going to attack it, so to speak. So just so you know that we are going to address those things as we go, and you just need to speak up and say, hey, because I'm aware, I see, from each section. So just so you know.
Marie Taylor, board member.
Okay.
So what I proposed was, so I understand there could be egos affected by what I'm trying to do. And so I understand that there's a lot of hard work put into what you have been working on for apparently years. And I was not here for those discussions. So I apologize, I guess. So I am coming in late in the game, but I don't think there was ever a vote that said absolutely that the working draft was the document that had to be used as the baseline. So I just want to make that point. I do not remember that was ever voted on. So it seemed to me there was still opportunity. And I understand that everyone's saying that now there's 2 lawyers on it, but if one lawyer is not allowed to speak or offer ideas, then that's kind of getting shut down a little bit on that. And lastly, I would hope that if anyone else agreed with any of the ideas that I have proposed in the ordinance, that they would feel at liberty to speak up and make those amendments, and it wouldn't all rely on me having to make every single amendment that was reflected in the proposal that I put forth.
Okay, this is Chair Salvini. Thank you, Marie. I'm going to move to Ginny, and Bill, I saw your hand up, and then Stephanie. Ginny?
Jenny Robinson, board member. I personally see a lot of value in, I know that obviously Marie and I are new, and you've been working on this for a long time. And I see value in reviewing Marie's proposed alternative. You know, Marie came into this wanting to kind of take, you know, more of a bird's eye view and say, okay, what are we really wanting to focus on as a board? And so having that opportunity to give that time and space to review this new board member's proposed draft that she's obviously, I mean, gosh, like she's just killing it. So before getting stuck into the weeds of specific wording and, you know, specific parts of the ordinance, I think that would bring a lot of value to the discussion.
Okay, thank you, Jenny. This is Chair Salvini. We'll move to Bill.
I'll pass to Board Member Littleton.
Okay.
Okay, this board member, Stephanie Littleton, once again, going back to Marie Taylor's proposed ordinance, which I have read through all of the entirety of it. Majority of it, with maybe a few additionals added in there, are really a kind of a reiteration of what was on the initial. It's just kind of the way it's laid out is much easier to read. So once again, I appreciate it. There's a little bit of clarification in there as well. So once again, my proposal is that we go start from the top, from section 2502, and each piece from her proposal to what the city staff has recommended, we look at each and we get to speak on that, right? So Marie, you have an opportunity once again, and you may have some additionals in here that you can speak to as we go through the sections. This was kind of, the layout is really meant to just kind of try to move us forward so we can get to working on each section as we can, you know, as far as we can get through tonight. Doesn't mean anybody's going to get any less conversation though.
Board Member Gibson.
Jane Gibson, board member. I just would like to review a little bit of the history because in fact, this is an authorized working draft by this board. The board voted to create this working group and voted for the working group to produce a draft that the board would then work on. So it is the authorized draft, and that is in no way to say that what anybody else on this board wants to contribute, whether it's a PowerPoint presentation or an alternative draft, is not valuable, but there is a way to proceed that makes sense. Since we have an authorized draft, I think there are a lot of things in Marie's alternative draft proposal that I would like us to discuss, some interesting things and some things that could improve the work that the working group did. This is not an attempt to silence anybody, but it is a sensible procedure that allows us to go forward based on what the board has agreed to do. So I would encourage us to go forward and, you know, stop dragging our feet and let's get on with it.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, Stephanie, do you want to go ahead and return to the process?
You bet. This board member, Stephanie Littleton, gonna go back to the starting point of section 12502 and put out for discussion for the scope for this section. And it's kind of open point right now. So whoever would like to begin. This board member, Stephanie Littleton, since we have so much silence, I'm just going to jump in here for a second and just remind from the table notes from the last meeting and looking at our working document. Once again, the working document states racial or other bias-based policing, including excessive use of force and other policing practices that lead to community member complaints. On the flip side, the other recommendation is to narrow the focus to bias-based policing, kind of in a nutshell. So at some point we have to have some kind of consensus here of, or we discuss it, or we can move on for a motion if that's where we're going to stand, because we do need to move somewhere on the scope. I'm not sure who raised their hand first. Bill, go ahead.
Well, it seems to me on section 2502, board member Taylor has offered an alternative in her proposal. I think that's the discussion right now, whether we want to limit it or we want to broaden the scope. And now's the time to talk about that, it seems to me like.
Mm-hmm.
Marie?
Board Marie Taylor. So in the PowerPoint that I did, which is in your packets, I found out just recently myself, I did not know that the Douglas County was doing a comprehensive contact study of investigatory stops where they were going to be looking at whether any of those indicated any kind of minority disparities. And so I gave you the link to the county's website where they have more information about that study. They're in the midst of data collection right now, which I did not know about, but it's a fairly comprehensive study they have in mind. So I think that part of what we've been struggling with as a board is not having all the information before we were asked to make a major change to an ordinance that, is amendable later on as well. So that's why I was thinking of this as really a phased approach. We don't have to reinvent the entire board in order to start doing some immediate work to start looking at what I thought was the focus, which is, I guess, what's up for discussion too. But so I just encourage everyone to kind of keep their eyes out for that study that's happening right now. Was, I think, a little delayed because of the pandemic and no one was making any contacts because we were physically distancing. So I think that that's a good thing, either that if you don't think that this work can wait to have that data, that we should at least keep tabs on what's happening with that, because it would inform this board's work too.
Very good, thank you. And that's can be found on page 2. The hyperlink is there, right? Or of your, excuse me, this is Chair Salvini, of what you submitted in your PowerPoint, correct? Page 2.
And this is Marie Taylor, board member. Can we share screen on the ordinance as we go through it? That might be more helpful, of the working draft ordinance.
Thank you, Marie. We've got a question. This is Chair Salvini with Sanjay, board member.
I just wanted, this is Sanjay Mishra, board member. I just wanted remind the old board members and mention to the new that the group which is doing the study made an extensive presentation to us, I think in December, Lieutenant Ernst, right? My recollection, right? They did a presentation to us, a full half hour, 45 minutes or something about what they are doing and what they are, when they are supposed to get the data, because we were asking them as we were looking for good data, they said they were going to generate it for us. So we are aware of this, and we have spoken to the principals, the consultants.
Okay, Stephanie?
This board member, Stephanie Littleton, I'm trying to recall someday, I think if that started, or maybe Marie, if you saw further, was that like maybe a year ago? I think you've been at it maybe a year.
Correct. It's Marie Taylor, board member. Yeah, it looks like it started in 2018, and it was supposed to be a 2-year project.
Yeah.
And so they're in data collection, and they did a presentation to that board in the county in May, and that's on their website. But it's really, they're still collecting data. So I'm glad to hear that what Sanjay is telling us, that they did reach out to this board. I'm really glad to hear about that.
Yeah, thank you, Marie. This board member, Stephanie Littleton, yeah, they did a pretty good presentation and gave us a really good in-depth about what it was going to be entailed and such. I don't think we've had a follow-up since, but I do want to add to what do we know, just for current date, going back to, and I know there's lots of conversation just on this call tonight about, how many complaints and what are those, how are those coming in and those types of things. But here's what we do know. We know, and I've got kind of the breakdown actually back to 2015. On the average, we have maybe one bias-based complaint a year. On the average for community complaints, maybe 5 or 6 in a year. Now, and this is an assumption on my part, not talk to other people with this board, but if I'm looking at the broad scope, then I'm thinking, those are the type of complaints that we're probably going to be looking at. And my concern isn't with the volume per se. It's about being here for the community and getting engaged and getting to see those and get on with that piece of it, because that's what we're here for one of the many things besides community engagement, such that's in our ordinance. But I think that's an important initiative that we have to get engaged in sooner than later. And those numbers don't speak to me that they're not too unreasonable whatsoever. The other piece of what do we know is, and I'm kind of talking off cuff because I can't think of all of the citizens' names, but I know that we have received 3 written letters or communications from citizens that have stated that they feel that we should be broad scoped, in particular with the complaints and otherwise. And there's a lot of communication on that. One of them recently was Joe, I can't remember her name, but anyway, there's 3 of them, and I'm just kind of putting that out there that, if we're listening to, I know it's 3, it's not like, as many, compared to average of our community population, but it's important that we're listening to them as well. So that's some of what I know is that, we've been 2+ years as a board not having seen one complaint at all. And so we're still trying to address that initiative. The complaints are very minimal, bias-based to the community complaints that we would even look at. So that's my 2 cents for my feelings about moving forward on this and making a decision. Thank you.
Okay. So why don't we return to the process, Stephanie, if you wouldn't mind? And I think there might be two issues that we really might need to discuss that are really critical to the ordinance, and that is what our role is and what our responsibility is, so we're clear on that. Would everyone agree with that, or am I off base here? And then I think that's something that needs clarification, and I think that's a big one. Bill?
This is Board Member Graybill, and on that, isn't that what 2502 does? Doesn't that address that?
It does. I think, Marie, your proposal, and that would be on 1, 2, 3, 4, the 4th page of your document, of your PowerPoint, is that correct?
Okay.
Marie Taylor, board member. Is this a question for me?
Yeah, I mean, do you want to talk about how this differs from the original draft?
My version or your? I'm confused where.
Well, the work group's version.
Okay, so are we talking about 2502?
Yes, the purpose of the board, Article 25.12502.
Okay, so Marie Taylor, board member. So you've added in various other kinds of complaints that could be heard.
Right.
Specified excessive use of force, which I don't think you need to actually call out because you say all policing practices. I don't know why we'd have to do that. And then we have an undefined term. And then it says refer them to CPOST, but I don't think we should do that because our ordinance is, our definition of bias-based is differs. And plus I don't know if CPOST, I think we've already talked about that though, that perhaps CPOST we shouldn't be directing them to CPOST at all. So I think that goes. So really then the only thing that's really different is if you want to do what you're saying is to add in specifying different kinds of policing practices, which I guess would encompass all complaints, which I still don't understand what that would mean, all complaints. So, but I don't know if this is helpful or not, a good use of time.
Okay. Okay. Bill, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I'm confused. What, can you identify what documents from the agenda items we're looking at and discussing?
Right. The document I'm looking at is the under under B, the first document, draft ordinance number 9324 working document.
All right.
Stephanie?
This board member, Stephanie Littleton. Tanya, are you referring to the table of items? Is that what Bill's trying to identify?
Yeah.
Okay. Got it, Bill?
Yeah.
Okay.
Go
ahead, Bill.
This is board member Grable. I just want to make sure everybody's on the same page looking at the same document, because we went through this Kansas CPOST, I think at the last meeting, and it was clearly not appropriate. And the document I'm looking at that you just referred to, board member Salvini, includes that language, and I thought we had a red line version that had taken that out.
This board member,
If I'm
Stephanie.
not mistaken.
Yeah, Bill, this is not an updated document this is from the last meeting. So it's updated. So it still has that in there, and we did talk about that, but none of this has been updated from that last meeting. We're just utilizing this as a resource document from notes made from.
Right.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
this is Brandon McGuire, Assistant City Manager. I'm sitting here trying to think of how I might be able to better facilitate everybody viewing the same document, and this follows up on Board Member Taylor's request several minutes ago. I will say that my experience with Zoom is very clunky because you can only share one screen at a time.
Okay.
And really, it seems the board is looking at several different documents on the agenda, but if there's one that the board members feel like would be more valuable to share, then maybe I can pull that up, and that way everybody can be looking at the same thing.
Sure. I think that would be helpful. We'll go back to Marie. Jane, I saw your hand up.
No, thanks. Pass.
Okay. Stephanie?
This is Board Member Stephanie Littleton. I apologize. I thought I had covered some of the main things, but I'm going to add a few more things that I really kind of spaced off to talk about for the broaden of the scope of the complaints. And I did go find, I had laid out a couple of the citizen letters that were sent in. So I do want to kind of bring attention to that. One of them is from Joe Taylor, sent on September 2nd. It says, "Dear members of the Police Review Board, I encourage you to broaden the scope of the complaints you review. I am well aware of implicit color bias, and I applaud your efforts in that regard. Given the recent reports of several Lawrence police officers' questionable behavior, and given the community's and nation's focus on police accountability, now is the time to make the Lawrence Police Review Board a model for the state and nation." That's one. Second is from Clark Cohn back in June of 2020. "The city of Lawrence should expand the powers and composition of its community police review board to make it more effective and enhance its credibility with the public." And then it goes on for quite a while. I just didn't have those right here. I apologize. But I also to comment on my thoughts about as far as the broad scope and the concerns. And I think Jane Gibson had spoken of this a couple of times in past meetings, but definitely the concern that if we don't look at all of these complaints, then we are going to miss patterns of police misconduct. And I think we would be remiss if we don't look at all of them. So thank you.
Okay. Jennifer?
Board Member Jenny Robinson. I know I've stated this before, but I like to state it again that I do think that broadening would be helpful because, like I said earlier, putting the burden of identifying a bias-based policing encounter on the complainant or on the police department, it seems like it would be helpful to have an outside organization or group such as ourselves reviewing those and looking at patterns, especially for groups that might not identify themselves as being the victims of bias-based policing.
Okay, Marie?
Marie Taylor, board member. So it seems to me that the concept of expanding, the reasoning for expanding is changed a bit. It seems like the concept now is that we should expand because we may spot other sorts of patterns that may have been not classified as bias, and so we're trying to get at something broader, which is very different from what I first read in the working document when it seemed like the focus was on who will speak for the white heterosexual male that's how I took the reasoning for including a broader scope, that we were somehow missing it. I mean, that's what it read like to me. So if I misinterpreted that's something that's different, but it seems like that's the reasoning for broadening has shifted a bit.
Mm-hmm. Okay, this is Chair Salvini calling on Board Member Bill.
This is Board Member Graybill. I think the intention of the working group was simply equal treatment for every citizen of the city of Lawrence. If you're subject to some kind of mistreatment at the hands of the police, you ought to have some way to have that reviewed. It doesn't make any difference whether you're white heterosexual male, whether you're a black female, whether you're an Indian male, it doesn't make any difference what your color is, what your religion is, or anything else. All citizens should have access to that. And I think that was our thinking. We weren't trying to protect, quote, heterosexual white males, unquote. That certainly was the furthest thing from my mind. Thank you.
Chair Salvini calling on Board Member Murray.
Thank you for that clarification. So I guess this really goes back to the intent of what this board's purpose is, because anyone can file a complaint.
Yes.
This board does not stop that from happening. And actually, we can take any kind of complaints and we can forward them on that we received. So the question then becomes, is the purpose of this board to address something that we think that the community as a whole sees that there's a marginalized community within that community that needs some special attention because of the kinds of encounters that they have that make them question whether there's equality in this country.
Board Member Jane.
Jane, you're muted.
Sorry, Jane Gibson, board member. I don't think anybody here would disagree that we have a national problem with bias-based policing. We are working at a local level and without any data. So my argument is that we should gather the data and not make the assumption about what's going on locally without data to support that. And I don't want to repeat all the arguments that I made before, so I'm not going to do that, but I will just underscore the problem that if you only gather data on complaints that are already defined as bias-based, you have effectively loaded the dice or cherry-picked the data, and you don't really know the extent of the problem because you are hiding all of the counter evidence. So just from a point of view of trying to understand what problem we have, if we have a problem, we have to see all of the data. We can't just see the data that are defined in advance of our review as bias-based. And then having said that, we are effectively deciding that there are either going to be some groups of people whose complaints are not going to matter to us because they aren't in protected classes, or we're going to decide that there are some kinds of alleged police misconduct that aren't going to matter to us. And neither one of those seems to me to be a scenario that supports the interest of this community in promoting, to the extent that this board can do that, or contribute to it in any case, these healthy police community relations. And I think ultimately that's what I understood this board to exist for, is to advance these healthier relationships so that members of the community and the police build mutually respectful relations and everybody is safer as a result of that. So, I think that we should, I think we need to broaden the scope to be sure that we can find bad apples if there are bad apples to be found. And we should not deliver a message that there are some kinds of police misconduct that we're okay with if the allegations come from people who are not in protected classes. That's my argument.
Okay, thank you, Board Member Jane. Sanjay.
Board Member Sanjay Mishra. So if I understand the discussion, it's about, we are worried that we may be swamped with too many complaints. That could be one conclusion. And with that setup, we do not have enough time to investigate or look at what is traditionally defined as bias-based policing. So given past history, or given history, I was going to suggest that we broaden it for now and then see how we fare with the workload. And if it is that we get 35 complaints in a year that we need to look at, and each complaint takes 2 weeks, that's less doable. Then we need to narrow our focus. Then we need to ask the question of prioritization. But ultimately, as Bill and Jane, and I'm sure Marie also wants, is that the police interactions with the community be professional, irrespective of, as what Bill said, is color, creed, origin, whatever. So to that extent, at this point, I would lean towards broadening it, because that brings into our scope a few other things. And again, this is still a learning organization. And as we move through, we can then have the same discussion, maybe 2 years out, hopefully not before 2 years out, and then make some changes going forward. So I look at this as a living document. And it's, having said that, I also absolutely agree with Mary, is if we have to define something very tightly, we need to do it from the outset, so things happen and get the desired impact, have the desired impact. So thank you.
Thank you, Sanjay. Jen.
Jenny Robinson, board member. I just would like to validate Marie's initial impressions of this section. It felt like that to me, you know, as soon as we're defining, okay, do we want to just do racial or bias-based policing, to feel that pushback for no, we want to look at everything. You know, framing is really important, especially on this kind of a board. And so we need to be cognizant of how we're framing our wording and our choices, and, you know, centering the voices of the people who are traditionally oppressed in our communities. And yes, you know, and this comes back to, you know, gathering data. Sorry, my dog is snoring beneath me here. This comes back to the data that we're gathering too, because there might be an encounter with a houseless, you know, heterosexual white man that could still be bias-based policing. But we might not be collecting that data. And so I think this needs to go hand in hand with a policy recommendation about standardizing those data collection procedures. But I wanted to validate what Marie shared and just reiterate how important it is as this board that we frame things mindfully and aware of how it sounds within our group as well as to the community.
Thank you, Jenny. This is Chair Salvini calling on Stephanie Littleton.
Thanks, Tanya. This board member, Stephanie Littleton, you know, Jenny and Marie, that make a great point back to how the data is being collected, and we've gained a lot of seems like a lot of information tonight about that, and definitely how we can, you know, I think Lieutenant Ernst heard that strongly. I think they're wanting to do so as well at the police department to standardize, and we as a board, absolutely, we can give some great feedback in how to make that move forward. And I think that goes hand in hand with what we're trying to do here, which is phenomenal to know. Now we have some basis of where that kind of stands and grow together with it. So anyway, I just want to make a comment that it's good to know that where we stand on that. So.
Well, this is Chair Salvini, and I think I want to summarize at this point that that after hearing the report from Sergeant Ernst, that I think we all, talking through it and talking to where we are, all agree that, and I think Board Member Gibson said it well, that that's a policy and a practice that the Lawrence Police Department really does need to work on in terms of how those complaints are received and how they're screened and how they're handled, and that starting to look at that data is important to look at particular patterns that might emerge, and keeping in mind how we're framing, I'm going back to that term, of what what folks we want to make sure receive attention that may be in those protected classes, more specifically. Does that kind of summarize what I've heard folks talk about this evening? Or am I completely off base? So I've heard some consensus going in that direction to look at all complaints and monitor that until the practices of the policy and process of taking in, screening, and addressing those issues progresses through the department. Jane.
Jane Gibson, board member. I'm not insensitive to the fact that Jenny and Marie both read that purpose to somehow foreground the needs of white heterosexual males, even though that was never in the minds of the working group. I hear you're saying that, so it's easy enough to change the wording here. To something like the board shall review complaint investigations conducted by the police department that result in community member complaints. Well, of course, we'd have to fix that a little bit, but we don't have to have, I think what we were doing was foregrounding the racial and bias-based policing because that was in the original ordinance and then expanding beyond what was original. And that's how it was, why it was written the way it was. But we can remove all references to all categories of people and kinds of misconduct, alleged misconduct, and just talk about, just say that we're going to review complaint investigations by the police department when those complaints are lodged by citizens, and or I want to say community members, because not everybody in this community is a citizen, as it turns out. I would suggest that just a modification of the wording to remove that sense that somehow this is about the needs of white heterosexual males.
Jane, for clarification, which document were you reading from?
Well, the one that we all should be working on is probably the red line version.
Red line, right.
4502 purpose of the board. This is Jane Gibson, board member, sorry.
Sure, thank you.
Why we have one document to work on so that we're not looking at different documents. We need to all look at the same document. And I would hope that if anybody else wants to add to this, that this is the time to bring those up. But right now we need to focus on scope.
Thank you. Bill?
So we're working on the red line version. Is that what we're working off of?
Yes.
Okay. All right. That answers my question. Thank you.
This is Chair Salvini, and I want to ask Brandon and Assistant City Manager Brandon and City Attorney Tony, is that intent clear enough to ask you to put that into ordinance language to help us out on that?
City Attorney Tony Wheeler, yes, I believe we can move in that direction and bring back language that follows the recommendations of Dr. Gibson. And Tony Wheeler, City Attorney, I just want to proceed that we would then also fix the reference to the Kansas Seapost, as I heard discussed at the last time. And then just one other point of clarification, in that section, our staff did identify that perhaps there would be interest in having a purpose that's sort of a catch-all that would allow this board to complete any task assigned to it by the City Commission, so that if new issues arise that they want you to look at, you have the flexibility to proceed without an immediate amendment. I'd like some feedback on whether there's interest in adding that.
I saw some hands go up. This is Chair Salvini. I'll call on Sanjay first and then Stephanie.
I was going to say, Sanjay Mishra, board member. I was saying yes to Tony Wheeler's addition of that fourth point.
Okay. Yeah. Board member Jenny?
Board Member Jenny Robinson. Jane, I just want to clarify, are you suggesting that we take out mention of the protected classes of people, of community members?
Jane Gibson, board member. Yes, I'm suggesting that we focus on alleged misconduct from community members and take out all references to different kinds of people and different kinds of misconduct. I thought that was your concern. You made a valid point, Jenny. I wanted to come back to that because it supports the need to broaden our scope, and that is that there can be people who are in protected classes who lodge complaints, but because the complaints are themselves not considered to be on the basis of bias, those complaints also don't have an ear. They don't have this board to oversee their work. So that seems to me to be a pretty important reason to think about the fact that we can't choose against certain kinds of misconduct and we can't choose against certain kinds of people. We need to be broad enough that we can actually understand what's going on out there and gather the data and have a handle on this so that we can support the needs of the community as well as the needs of the police to be able to promote these good relationships. I hope I answered your question, Jenny. I'm sorry I went a little further than you wanted.
Board Member Stephanie Littleton, and I think Judy froze up, but she may be wanting to make a post comment on that. So go ahead, Stephanie.
This is Board Member Stephanie Littleton. Yeah, just for clarification, Jane, I didn't catch all that at first, but I got on your second round there to replace with just misconduct, alleged misconduct for community members. But so are you suggesting, I mean, that's kind of a catch-all and take out excessive use of force, or are we leaving that type of information still in there?
This is Jane Gibson, board member. I leave it to the wisdom of the collective board to decide how to word it, but I was trying to respond to the concern that we had written a purpose that looks like we're trying to focus in on white heterosexual males. So my suggestion was that we remove references to categories of people and categories of misconduct. So that would eliminate the use of excessive force. It would also eliminate racial and other bias-based policing, and it would just focus on community complaints. But I would like to say that we had a discussion with Tony and Randy, and I think Brandon was there, Stephanie and I were there, and Bill, and we were talking about this particular question. And we said that the one category we did not want, the category of complaint we did not want to have to deal with was personnel complaints within the police department. So I want to be clear that I don't mean to in any way to try to pick up on something that doesn't seem to belong to us, but would maybe seem to be implied if we aren't careful to exclude it somehow. And Tony understands, I think, what we're after there and can maybe get the wording right. But we don't want to deal with internal police personnel matters.
Okay, I see Jenny, Bill, your hand was up, and then Stephanie.
I'll pass it on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Jenny?
Sorry, I froze up there. Jenny Robinson, board member. I just wanted to follow up with Jane and say that, so yes, I think that we're on the same page about expanding the role. However, I think it is, and no, it is extremely valuable to name and center the voices of community members in protected classes. And our naming of those can guide, documentation procedures within the police department. So I think that there's still value in stating that we're going to prioritize and center the experiences of people in these groups while reviewing all complaints. Because without naming, I said it already.
Stephanie, we'll go with you, and then Jane.
This board member, Stephanie Littleton. Jane, I'll let you go here real quick. I know you want to comment to Jenny, but I just wanted to comment back. I forgot to Tony, and I am in agreement as well to add that forth for the recommendation, so we don't have to keep changing. Okay. So thank you, Tony, on that one.
Okay, thank you. Jane, did you?
Yeah,
Have another comment?
I was just trying to continue this conversation so that Jenny and I are clear with each other and everybody else understands what I'm trying to say and what Jenny's trying to say, so she can clarify for herself. But okay, so what I'm understanding you to say now, Jenny, is you would like for us to say that we will review racial or other bias-based policing complaints, but not only those, right? We want to broaden the scope to say, including but not limited to racial or other bias-based policing complaints. Does that catch it? Does that do it, Jenny?
Jenny Robinson, board member. I think, and this is just me speaking, I think that reviewing all complaints is valuable. I think that naming protected classes of citizens with whom, who we will give it special focus and attention to is valuable. And, because that can guide our policy process with the police department for that documentation. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a both and kind of situation coming from me personally.
Yeah, this is Tanya real quickly, and I just want to say I completely agree with that. And I think what we can do, because again, operationally, we won't be doing that work for the police department, but we certainly can state, not necessarily in the ordinance, but in the work that we're doing to make sure that it's real clear in as the improvements occur, that the attention to the protected, how those are screened and identified, are real clear. Does that make sense?
Jenny Robinson, board member. So to follow up, sorry, it's my dog again. So you're saying that we wouldn't list protected classes of people in this section of the ordinance. Is that right?
Well, Jane, can you go ahead? You're on mute. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I hit unmute and it just didn't unmute me. Jane Gibson, board member. No, not right here, but we would preserve the definitions that would identify protected classes. But as long as this section says including but not limited to racial or other bias-based policing, I think we have broadened the scope and we preserve the definitions below.
That's what I was hearing Jane say, and that's where I was coming from on my comment. Mm-hmm. Marie.
Board member Marie Taylor, can we be really careful when we use the language limited, including but not limited to, because it's really hard for people to figure out what that scope means, because you've basically opened it up, even though you're saying that it's defined. So I think we're just really careful when we keep saying including but not limited to, because you're including the whole, like everything. And I think you've already said you don't want personnel actions in there. So it's going to get really hard if we start using that language. So I just want to make that comment.
Okay, thank you, Marie. Jane, did you want to respond?
No, sure, Jane Gibson, board member. I just want to agree.
Sure.
I'll ask Tony to help us with that. With the language.
Absolutely.
Broaden the scope, but eliminate police
personnel specific. Mm-hmm.
I think we're clear about that.
I think so too. I see Bill's hand up.
I think we grappled with that when we were working on that as a group, and the way we addressed that your concern, board member Taylor, is at the last of that sentence, or other policing practices that lead to community member complaints, which would cut out the internal stuff. So we considered your very concern when we were doing that. And maybe that wasn't the best way to word it, but that's how we tried to get around that.
Okay. Thank you. I want to circle back around real quickly. Tony, have we expressed at least, is in some unifying way our intent here?
City Attorney Tony Wheeler, yes, I've been taking copious notes, and I also will have the benefit of reviewing the tape. So yes, I will do my very best to incorporate the comments that I've heard tonight. And of course, we'll bring back a draft for you to review and look at and make sure that we did in fact capture the essence of your direction.
Thank you very much. Okay, Stephanie, do we want to move on? And thank you all very much. That was to me a huge item of discussion, at least for tonight, to arrive. I think where we have. Stephanie, are there a couple of other things that you wanted to address in the process?
This board member.
Quickly.
I'm sorry, Stephanie, hold on just a minute. This is Chair Salvini. I'm going to call on Sanjay real quickly.
Sorry, I was slow to the draw. I wanted to ask, this may be a procedural question. So, did everybody agree? Should we put it to a vote, or we wait till we see the final draft to put it into a vote?
I would like to... what's the pleasure of the group? Stephanie?
This board member, Stephen Littleton, I guess we could put that before city staff to Tony Wheeler and see if that's what we should do before they draft that. So we get an idea which way we need to go here, if that matters.
Okay, thank you. Marie?
Yeah, let's just put it to a vote and then you can move on.
Okay, so the recommendation is to put it to a vote right now before we move forward. Do I hear a motion? I see Jane.
I move that we broaden the scope of the board as recommended by the working group with the changes that we've discussed that limit the complaints we'll receive to community member complaints.
Okay, you've heard the motion. Is there a second?
This board member, Stephanie Littleton.
Stephanie?
Stephanie Littleton, I second the motion that Jane has made.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. All those in favor say yay. All those opposed say no. We'll start with, excuse me, Board Member Gibson.
Yay.
Board Member Marie.
Nay.
Board Member Jennifer.
Nay.
Board Member Bill.
Board Member Bill, yay.
Board Member Stephanie.
Yay.
Board Member Sanjay.
Yay.
And Board Member Salvini, yay. So the final tally, 5 yays and 2 nays. Okay, Board Member Jenny.
Jenny Robinson, board member. I just want to clarify my nays because I'm still not comfortable with excluding a list of protected classes of community members from this section.
Thank you.
Yes.
Sanjay.
So, is there maybe I should know, but is there a list of these classes that is standardly accepted, which we can pack into this? Otherwise, see, what I'm saying is, if we call out a few communities or populations, somebody we miss will feel mega slighted, and we have hurt ourselves. So that's why I'm worried about putting these classes of groups in there. We are there for everybody. But you have a point. So if there's a standard set up somewhere, I'm willing to accept it.
Okay, Board Member Jenny?
Jenny Robinson, board member. So I believe the wording we were using before is from some other, I apologize, I don't remember where it's from, but the race, color, age, ancestry, sexual orientation, disability, ethnicity, national origin, gender identity, religion, and we added socioeconomic status.
Yeah. Yes.
And so I hear you on that, Sanjay, for sure. That's a pretty exhaustive list. And adding the socioeconomic status, you know, I spoke on this, I think, at our first meeting, because especially, yeah, our community houseless folks are targeted often with police encounters. So that was important to add. There's power in naming it, and there's power in being represented in this wording. And so I think that I'm a social worker. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know what wording we are able to use, if we're able to say giving special attention to prioritizing of these traditionally oppressed classes. So.
Okay, Stephanie?
Board member Stephanie. I'm kind of going to segue into the definitions since it's kind of a good segue now, if I may. The racial or other bias-based policing, to Jenny's point, because I kind of went through and looked at the city's definition to our definition to the LPD's definition, and there are some differences. I don't know if everybody's noted what those are. And I guess then for discussion about what we do, because I don't know that we've actually moved on this as to what we would include or not include in ours, but just to make a couple of points, the socioeconomic status is not included in our working document. It's not in the ordinance, our ordinance. It's not included in the city of Lawrence. It is included in the Lawrence Police Department's fair and impartial policing administrative policy. Kind of as I go through this, I guess the thought is should all be consistent. Okay, so that's for socioeconomic status. Housing status, I think Jenny also had mentioned that, is not included in any of the definitions. The other thing I did note is color is included in our version, the cities, but not the Lawrence Police Departments. So just kind of food for thought as we kind of walk through the definitions. And I'm not including this, but I think Marie's got a really good point to consider and talk about adding the law enforcement action statute as well. That's kind of another addition to this. But anyway, I'm going to kind of leave that open for us to discuss on the definitions and what should we include and should all be consistent.
I'm calling on Board Member Jenny.
Jenny Robinson, board member. I appreciate you, kind of comparing those across the board, Stephanie. And I think that definitions don't get changed by sticking, with uniformity across the board. So I think that we have the opportunity here to push the boat out a little bit, and we're in the right community to do that. And so I think it is our responsibility as a board to broaden that definition to include socioeconomic status and housing status. Because that's our duty. We need to push the boat out, and hopefully that can inspire change across the board.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm trying to recall some conversations we've had historically, and I don't think there was a problem with including that in this. Bill?
This is Board Member Grable. As a practical matter, I guess a question to adding socioeconomic status to this. How do you go about proving that? And what does that really mean? I mean, when you get down to the practicalities of it, how are the police supposed to try to determine that? And how would a board like this one determine that? Now, I'm not sure how I don't know. Maybe you have something in mind.
Yeah, I've got some hands going up, including mine. So let's start with Marie.
Sorry, my cursor was far away. I don't think we've required a test for any of these. I mean, that's part of what we've
Right.
and we have gender expression. How are we going to, we're not requiring anyone to test. We're going by self-identification.
Okay, I say Sanjay.
I agree with Sanjay Mishra, board member. I agree with what Mary said. None of these are tested, and you take the officer's word for it, but you get a chance. So if you put some of these, you get a chance to see your data by that. And you are forcing the police to be thinking that way. So for example, just like we are going to force them to think in terms of the national origin or gender of the other person, we got to ask them to start thinking about the homeless status or residential status and the socioeconomic status of those people. Yeah, if you, and randomly, if you want to verify it, you can go back and do an anonymous check on, so there was a complaint, what's your income? And people will give you. I means if you want to create good data, they will give you. Thank you.
Jenny, I think I saw your hand. Jenny, no, Jane? I think an important thing here is that we want to make sure, I mean, we need data and we need to look at patterns of interactions, however they are, to make sure there isn't a bias toward a particular class of people. Okay, I remember a conversation that we had maybe 3 meetings ago, Jenny, that when we were discussing the option of adding or the opportunity of adding socioeconomic status, that how is it that we can't you know, turn our eye to data where we see patterns of a number of people who are homeless constantly having interactions, that those are documented pieces of data that, you know, that should be concerning us, correct? I mean, so again, I don't think it's, I think our role is to, and please forgive me if I'm wrong, but is to have oversight to that data, make sure the data is clean, make sure the data is consistent with, with a careful eye, is a policy practice and a process that law enforcement integrates into their data, so we can look at those patterns of behavior and make recommendations. And excuse me if I'm completely wrong there, but I think that's what we're talking about. So yes, certainly is the opportunity for people to self-disclose at the time of, you know, of their situation and all of that. But also there should be some data, and I'm, you know, maybe looking at some of the reports and what kinds of intake forms come along with those interactions with law enforcement, along with the outcome of whatever those interactions are. So anyway, Jane.
Jane Gibson, board member. Having broadened the scope, the issue really becomes the allegations of misconduct. And these definitions will help people who want to file complaints about different categories of people in protected classes. Socioeconomic status is notoriously difficult to define. Social scientists don't know how to define it. And so every single study that uses SES defines it within the scope of its own study. So there's no universal agreement about what SES is.
Right.
But people want to self-identify and say, well, I think that this police officer violated this policy because of my poverty, or they can say that, and we're going to review it either way, because we broaden the scope to make the misconduct the focus of our attention here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any problem with including socioeconomic status, but and as long as we allow people to self-identify, I don't see, we're not going to have a good definition of it, but it could help us with our data gathering. We don't have good definitions for race either. These are all categories that get constructed sometimes just on the ground and on the fly, and some are more meaningful in some situations than they are in others. So this gets really complicated. And I just think we should add these categories. They won't hurt us. They could potentially help us. We should just add them and move on.
Okay, is there a call for a vote on that to include and fold in socioeconomic status into the ordinance?
And housing status.
And housing status. Thank you, Jane. Jenny?
That's what I wanted to say.
That's your motion?
Oh,
okay.
Sorry. Jenny Robinson, board member. Yes, I would like to motion, and I would also like to make a comment that I'm glad that we are going to specifically name these classes.
Okay. Stephanie, I'm going to need to step away for a minute. I'm so sorry. Can we, would you mind taking over? Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Board member Stephanie Littleton, I'm gonna second that motion, Jenny.
Okay.
Sanjay, did you have a comment that I did not see?
That's okay. My comment was just like gender, ethnic origin, and other things are determined by the police. They are also making judgments of socioeconomic status. If I am in tattered shirts, they are making a judgment on economic status than if I am in a suit. So that's how it happens.
Jenny, go ahead.
Jenny Robinson, board member. Just to respond, Sanjay, the way I'm imagining the direction for these groups going is to be involved in a more standardized data collection process for when an officer is taking a complaint, for them to be able to say, are you alleging that you are the victim of bias-based policing based on your socioeconomic status, your housing status, etc., going down that list, and to allow the person to self-identify, one or multiple of those. So it's not a perfect system at the moment, and I acknowledge that.
Jane, go ahead.
Jane Gibson, board member. I couldn't hear Jenny's motion. I don't know if she froze up or it was something with my computer, but could I hear the motion again, please?
Jenny Robinson, board member. I apologize, Midco. I'd like to motion that we vote to include socioeconomic status and housing status in our list of protected classes.
Thank you. And we have a second already.
We do, board member Stephanie. I second it. So,
Bill has his hand.
I'm sorry, Sanjay.
Bill has his hand up.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Bill. Sorry.
Well, I'm voting no, and the reason I'm voting no, I still think it's too vague. I think it puts an undue burden on the police officers having to deal with those situations. And I think it almost gets into a vagueness argument constitutionally. So that's all I have to say.
This board member, Stephanie Littleton, thanks, Bill. I'm not sure if this is proper. Brandon, I move into a vote at this time. I know Bill's placed his out there. Is that proper at this point?
This is Brandon McGuire, Assistant City Manager. Yes, that's
The next action that would be appropriate at this point.
Okay, thank you. So very well, I'm going to move to the vote, and we'll move to Jane. Your vote?
Vote yay.
I'm sorry, can you repeat?
Yes, I vote yes.
Okay. I'll note Bill said, Bill, I'll go back and ask you again.
Sure.
Record.
Board Member Graybill, no.
Board Member Tanya?
Yes. Board Member Tanya Salvini, yay.
Okay. Sanjay?
Board member Sanjay Mishra, yes.
Thank you. Board Member Marie Taylor?
Board Member Marie Taylor, yay.
Thank you. And Board Member Jenny?
Board Member Jenny Robinson, yay.
All right. I think I've hit everybody. See, all myself?
No.
Board Member Stephanie Littleton, yes. So we have, looks like six yes and one no. So thank you all for that. I think, and we'll move, I'm going to move to the next part of this for Marie Taylor's recommendation. And I'll let Marie, if you don't mind, kind of speaking to it for adding, it looks like including a definition of the term enforcement action and such. So if you don't mind.
Sure. This is Marie Taylor. So when I see this section of the definitions, a lay person may think a law enforcement action means something very generic, but it's actually, this is all related to what's under the racial and bias-based policing statute. And so I think that it should refer back to that definition if that's what is intended. So enforcement action is very specific. It's related to, as you all remember from the trainings, it's related to like being held in custody, it's investigatory stops. And so it has a very defined meaning. And so I think that we should ask our city attorney's office to help us add a definition that would satisfy that understanding if that's what is intended. Or if the definition means it's supposed to be something different, then it should be defined differently than what's in the statute, but we have to make that clear. That's my suggestion.
Jane, go ahead.
I just have a question for Marie. This is Jane Gibson, board member. I guess I just took and clearly I was mistaken, but I just made a common sense reading of that phrase, law enforcement action, as any action by a law enforcement officer. So I wonder if you could clarify a little about what your concerns are about that phrase. I don't know the law the way you do, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on why this. I mean, I'm okay with getting a definition. I think that's fine, but I just wonder if you could explain a little more about why we need one.
Sure. Marie Taylor, board member. So this is in my in the PowerPoint I did. I gave you the references to the statute. So this whole section on racial bias-based policing. I mean, the part of the reason the board exists is as a community advisory board for the police when because of the reporting that they have to do. And so the reporting that they have to do is tied to a very particular definition of racial bias-based policing. And in that definition, it refers to a law enforcement action. And so when you go look at the statute, that's a defined term that's related to the kinds of actions that would have to be reported. Mm-hmm. So
well, how is it defined?
Oh,
is it excuse me, this is Board Member Salvini. Are you referring to KSA 22-4609? Okay. Yeah, and that would be in the document that Marie did, and that's what, page 5 maybe of that document?
I'm sorry to tell you, this is Jane Gibson, board member. I didn't see the PowerPoint. And I think you could stop the scolding for people not reading your PowerPoint.
Oh, so this is Marie Taylor. It's in the agenda. It's in the agenda packet.
That would be very helpful.
So, excuse me, this is Marie Taylor. It's in the packet, so I don't need to scold anyone. We're all supposed to read what's in the agenda packet.
I did not see that part of the packet. Could you just tell us what the definition says?
I've got it right here. Let me read it real quickly. The first is KSA 22-409. It is unlawful to use racial or other bias-based policing in A, determining the existence of probable cause to take into custody or to arrest an individual. B, constituting a reasonable and articulable suspicion that an offense has been or is being committed so as to justify the detention of an individual or the investigatory stop of a vehicle, or determining, which is C, I'm sorry, determining the existence of probable cause to conduct a search of an individual or a conveyance. Stephanie?
This board member, Stephanie Littleton, I'm just going to kind of segue, if I may, to Tony Wheeler and ask if there, since this was added in after we had met with your staff, if there's any concern with adding this, because I have my own feelings. I mean, I'm not concerned with it, but I just wanted to ask legally.
City Attorney Tony Wheeler. I think adding a definition of law enforcement action would be an improvement to the ordinance. I think that the definition that Board Member Marie Taylor identified is the language that is used in the racial and bias-based policing statute. There may be an interest in the board in having a broader definition. And so that is really where the discussion point should happen.
Okay.
And excuse me. Oh, I'm sorry, Tony Wheeler, City Attorney. Randy Larkin, Deputy City Attorney, is also on the call, and I'd ask him to add anything if I have omitted anything on this question.
This is Randy Larkin, Deputy City Attorney. You know, if you accept that as the definition of law enforcement action, you may end up excluding just other certain contacts that may not rise to those levels of just you know, a meeting on the street where an officer is rude, or, you know, some of those things and other types of complaints that would not rise to the level of being a law enforcement action. So you have to be careful, as this definition is somewhat narrow.
Okay, thank you so much for your feedback on that. So maybe interaction also might be considered in, down the road for a conversation to expand that definition, as City Attorney Wheeler suggested. Stephanie?
As this board member, Stephanie Littleton, you know, I appreciate the feedback from the city staff. You know, I guess we would kind of move on a motion here that can, you know, to consider including this with obviously the assistance of the city staff to include what they feel is appropriate, and then we'll review that. That's fair enough.
Okay. Is that a motion?
So moved.
Okay, Bill's making the motion. Is there a second?
It's board member Stephanie Littleton. I second the motion.
Okay, and Stephanie, could you repeat that motion?
The motion is for the board to include the enforcement action definition and have the city staff assist us to include what they feel is proper here in this definition.
Okay, very good. Discussion. Jane Gibson?
This is Jane Gibson, board member. I would like some clarification. Is this motion, Stephanie, intended to bind us? Are we voting for this addition, or are we voting to have the staff write it so that we can then review it and decide about it?
Board Member Stephanie Littleton, good point, Jane, because I do think that we will, I mean, I guess we can't really vote on until we see what the final is going to be, but I think the motion for them to write it and then we review.
Mm-hmm. Okay, any other
Bill has
discussions?
Bill, go ahead.
Bill? Yeah.
This is Board Member Graybill. As the person who made the motion, my intention was for the staff to come up with language that we would review at our next meeting, not necessarily meaning that this is what we want to run with.
Yeah. This is Board Member Stephanie Littleton. That's my same as the second motion. I'm with you, Bill.
Okay, any more discussion? Stephanie?
Sorry, Board Member Stephanie Littleton. I kind of want to go back a little bit and also ask the city staff. I don't want to be remiss if we kind of leave, and I know this was really about our ordinance, about them taking into consideration, and this would be something working in conjunction with the police department as well, to see about consistency in all of the definitions for racial or other bias-based policing being consistent. I don't want to leave that, alone, but that would make sure we include all of the same terminology.
This is Board Member Salvini. Are you referring to, Stephanie, the other definitions in Marie's proposal?
I'm sorry, no, I'm referring back to just from the city's definition of the racial or other bias-based policing, the Lawrence Police Department's, and to ours. There are some differences. For example, color is not included on the Lawrence Police Department's definition. I'm just kind of going back to those as far as looking at consistency across the board. There were some differences. And that's something I'm just asking city staff to please take into consideration. That's all.
Okay. Is there a response from City Attorney Wheeler or Larkin, Deputy?
City Attorney Tony Wheeler, we will certainly look at that. I will inquire with the police department as to the policy and find out why there is slightly different. And we're happy to report back to you on that. I will tell you there is an internal process right now about how police department policies are revised. And so, we would have to follow that procedure as it, under our current procedures that we're operating under. So we are happy to look into that and provide information back to this board at a future meeting. And I do appreciate you identifying the inconsistencies. I think that's something for us to follow up on. Is that sufficient?
Board Member Stephanie Littleton, yes, thank you so much, Tony.
Okay, any other, Jane Gibson?
I was just going to say we have a motion and a second, and we need to vote on.
We do. This is discussion. Any other discussion? Okay, if not, let's vote. All those in favor, yay. All those opposed, nay. Board Member Jane Gibson.
Yay.
Board Member Marie Taylor.
Yay.
Board Member Jenny Robinson.
Yay.
Board Member Graybill.
Yay.
Board Member Littleton.
Yay.
Board Member Sanjay.
Yes.
And Chair Salvini, yay. That's a unanimous vote of 7. That passes. Board Member Littleton.
Board Member Stephanie Littleton, thank you all on that. I wanted to kind of move to the next piece, I believe, was the complaint definition. And the city staff had given us some direction on that, kind of moving along here. If I remember right, my notes show that the or other laws was of concern. And I think she has down here that we are changing that to think it's to replace it with racial or other bias-based policing. But anyway, this is kind of our next step to roll into to talk about on the definitions of a complaint.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll open that up.
Okay. Open to discussion. Bill?
I would be in favor of accepting that section as it is, as with the recommendation made by the city staff for the change. That would be specifically strike the reference to other laws and replace it with racial or other bias-based policing complaints in the definition of complaint to achieve that goal, that language.
Stephanie.
This board member, Stephanie Littleton, I just wanted to get clarification from the city staff that where we have rules and regulations of the city, I assume that it would incorporate the city's ordinance definition there. Is that correct?
City Attorney Tony Wheeler. Yes, that would be the intention, to include the city ordinances.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I just want to make sure that it did include all that with all of the terms. Okay, thanks, Tony.
Jenny?
Jenny Robinson, board member. Just to clarify, are we discussing section B, complaint? Is that right? The definition of complaint.
Yep, that's correct.
I'm wondering about language. So an expression of dissatisfaction that contains an allegation that, if proved to be true, would be a violation of department policy. I wonder about including language for if proven to be true, would be a violation or would inform, future policy changes within the department. Because a complaint might not currently violate a policy, however, I don't know if that wording is important or allowed.
City Attorney Tony Wheeler, I think that would be problematic language because you cannot measure someone's performance if if it is subject to change in the future. You sort of have to be able to evaluate conduct based upon the rules in place at the time. So I think if we were to try to incorporate your language, I think we would run into some difficulties and some challenges.
Can I follow up?
I'm sorry, Bill. And then Jenny.
This is Board Member Grable, and this is a question for Attorney Wheeler. If we take out other laws, would that exclude being able to review a complaint based on a violation of civil rights, which is defined in the statutes? I just thought about that, and it's of some concern to me anyway.
This is Randy Larkin, Deputy City Attorney, and I think that was part of the situation in that we don't really have jurisdiction over, for example, a federal complaint or a constitutional violation. Now, there's always going to be some overlap, but we do have the jurisdiction, the ability to review our own department policies, our own regulations, and those types of things. However, there may be some of those department violations that might rise to the level of being a constitutional violation, but we would not be determining that there was a violation of the Fourth Amendment, for example. We would be determining that there was a violation of the city ordinance or that there was a violation of city policy. We would leave that to the federal courts to decide whether or not there was a constitutional violation. So that was the intent of removing other laws. We just thought that was a little bit too broad. It might be granting too much authority beyond what the city can actually grant to this board.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Stephanie, does that help in that section?
This board member, Stephanie Littleton, yes, it does. I appreciate everybody's feedback.
Okay. Okay, this is Board Member Salvini, and I am going to take a break here and say it's getting late, and we're having some good conversations. I think we're moving closer toward a final draft. We meet in 2 weeks. Is that correct, Brandon?
This is Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. We actually meet next week on the...
Oh, next week.
Yes, on the 8th, next Thursday.
Yes, next Thursday at 7 o'clock. Okay.
And I will remind the board that that meeting was originally intended to be used for training with the
training.
Yeah, with the Kansas Attorney General's office.
Okay. I just wanted to remind folks of that.
This board member, Stephanie Littleton, Tanya, do we want to move to make a motion on so we can kind of complete out the part on the complaint definition?
Yeah.
So anybody like to make a motion? Sanjay? Sanjay?
Sanjay Mishra, board member, make the motion that the definition of complaint be updated or whatever, however you want to put it.
Okay. Anybody want to second the motion?
I'd like a little more precision in that motion, please.
Thank you. Want it updated.
You're muted.
So, yeah.
Okay. Second motion for anybody want to make a second motion for updating it?
I'll second it.
Okay, Bill, go ahead. You are good for it?
You got a crafted bill now.
Oh, no, I thought I was seconding a motion.
We were waiting on somebody to craft it better.
That'd be way too taxing for me.
All right, so we got a second motion. Are we ready for a vote on this?
No.
No? Go ahead.
Well, we should have a clear reading of what we expect it to say.
Right. So let me try again. Can I try again?
Go ahead, Sanjay.
Please.
So the motion, thank you, Sanjay Mishra, board member. So the motion is to request the city staff, city attorney to come up with a definition for complaint, right? Which we will vote on. No?
This board member, Sanjay, let me just clarify that the city staff has stated their suggestion would be to specifically identify racial or other bias-based policing in the definition of the complaint to achieve that goal versus or other laws. Are you good with that?
So Stephanie, you should read it. I raised my hand too soon. You can. I agree with that, and I wanted to move that on.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. So instead of other laws, whatever the city attorney has plugged in works.
Okay. And
Jane?
I'm still not at all clear now about what this is supposed to say. Tony, could you help us here and tell us what you think this needs to say?
Certainly. City Attorney Tony Wheeler. I believe a motion could be amend the definition of complaint to strike the subcommittee's recommendation to referring to and other laws and replace it with the words racial and other bias-based policing complaints. That's what I heard.
Marie, go ahead. Marie?
Marie Taylor, sorry, I do that and then my cursor's not right there to unmute myself. I don't think we should define the word complaint and then have the word complaint in the same definition. So I just want to make that point. And I also don't think we need to say to include racial bias-based policing in the definition of complaint because we're hearing all complaints. So I think we should just make it so that we give the city attorney enough leeway to come up with a reasonable definition that is distinct enough so that we know what we're talking about.
Board Member Gibson.
Thank you. This is Jane Gibson, board member. I agree with Marie, but I think that the original recommendation that the working group discussed with Tony and Randy was to strike or other laws, and then we have an inclusive definition. That was the original, at least that was the discussion that the working group had. And I thought we, mainly because Bill understood the legal issues, that was the improvement that was needed. Am I mistaken about that, Stephanie and Bill?
I think that's a fair summation. This is board member Graybill.
This is Randy Larkin, Deputy City Attorney. I just wanted to say that there is the other law is the Kansas State Racial Bias Policing Program, and that is another law that the state has stated that the city can give the right to analyze to a board like this. That's the reason for its inclusion specifically, because the state law does allow this board, we'd substitute that language in for other law.
Okay, Stephanie, I'm circling back to you.
This board member, Stephanie Wilton, I'm kind of getting lost in the shuffle, trying to figure out where we want to go with this. If we, want to come back to, and I'm good with this as well. I'm not sure who said this, if it was Marie Taylor, but having the city staff redraft this, they did a recommendation, but I'm good either way.
Yeah, I like what Marie said too, in having the city attorney draft up something that's consistent with what the spirit of and the intent has been so far of the group, and bring it back into the document, and then we'll visit it then. Is that what I heard everyone say? Okay. So do we need a motion for that?
So moved. This is
okay. Thank you. Thank you, Bill. I mean, I know there's something back in the back of this short history, but I don't recall what it was, Sanjay. So we're just doing clarification now. Was that a second, Jane?
It can be if you want it to be, Jane Gibson, board member.
Oh, I like it. Thank you. Okay. All right. Is everyone clear on what that motion was?
Yes.
Any discussion? Okay, we'll go ahead and go for the vote. Board member Jane?
The motion was to have Tony fix it, right? Is that the motion?
Right.
Fix it.
It's folded into the draft. Absolutely.
And then we'll read it and we'll vote then, right? So right now we're just saying we'll her to fix it. Yay.
Yeah, and let me just go further. To fix it in the intent and the spirit in which we have gone, which really folds into what Marie mentioned earlier. Okay. So, yes. So, yay. So all those in favor signify with a yay or a nay. Board Member Jane.
Yay.
Board Member Marie.
Yay, Board Member Marie Taylor.
Thank you. Board Member Jennifer.
Yay.
Board Member Bill.
Board Member Bill, yay.
Board Member Stephanie.
Yes.
Board Member Sanjay.
Yes.
Board Member Salvini, yay. We've got unanimous 7 voted for that. Okay. Stephanie, circling back to you in the document.
Right. Great. This board member, Stephanie Littleton, we are moving on, you all. We're doing a good job here. You know, I know we're at 9:30 and I'm good to keep going. We can speak, anybody can speak up when they want to, if they want to stop at some point, but we can move on to the next section. 12504, specific duties of the board. That would be our next. I'm sorry, did I miss somebody?
Bill.
This is Board Member Graybill. Were you suggesting for anybody that suggests we ought to stop to say it now?
I wasn't really suggesting that, but if you feel that way, whichever, hey, I'm good.
Yeah, I would say that would be my sentiments.
Okay, all right.
Marie?
Board Member Marie Taylor, I am willing to stay up past my bedtime to get this in a way that we can make progress and get this through. I think we've already done most of the heavy, hard discussions.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm giving us 10 minutes. Oh, okay. Jane?
I might have 10 more minutes in me, but it is already past my bedtime.
Okay, very quickly, let's go ahead and start 1-2504. Okay, Stephanie. And I'm also looking. I'm looking at the work document, and I'm also looking at the PowerPoint, page 6. That Marie submitted. Marie, can you speak to that, please?
So, Marie Taylor, board member. So I think that maybe we could do this in parts, and because I think the specific duties there's quite a few of them. So maybe we should just run through 1, 2, 3, like just go through them. Just
okay. Okay, very good. Do you want to go ahead and facilitate that, please?
Okay, so I think I want to just make a global comment on 1 through 7. I think that language that was added about excessive use of force and other policing practices, all that every time that gets repeated, that whatever was revised in the initial section about purpose, just have that mirror that, so that it's not so repetitive, or if it has to be stated in each of those different sections, 1A, 1A, number 1 through 7, that it just consists of whatever was approved up in the purpose section. That's a comment on those sections.
Okay, let's pause right there real quickly. Is that something that you would be willing to work on, Tony Wheeler? Okay, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you. Jane.
Jane Gibson, board member. No, I was just going to endorse the suggestion that this should be made consistent with the original scope. So I just was underscoring, saying yes to what Marie said.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, Marie.
Sorry, I unmuted myself. So I just had a few ideas to add to the duties. And so I'll just say them as concepts and see if they're of interest. have it as part of our duty instead of just training on having advising the police on trainings that are related to police actions that have authority to also suggest other kinds of trainings that could prevent police misconduct. So that was one idea. And the other idea was that we have a requirement for the board to have at least one annual community-wide forum. So those are two ideas I thought we could add to the board. Those are the substantive ones.
Okay, thank you, Marie. And again, just for your reference, that's on page 6 of her PowerPoint, and I agree wholeheartly with those two. And once again, that's to recommend that the part of the purpose of the board is to recommend other trainings and that would be our role would be to recommend these trainings to prevent that are intended to prevent police misconduct, correct? And then the other to hold the annual community-wide forum. Jane?
Jane Gibson, board member. Does number 2, once we eliminate those sections that we're going to bring it in line with the original scope now, doesn't that capture other trainings or not? It seems to me that captures, once you eliminate those things, you have it. That we will review annual training, suggest substitute or additional training. Does that not capture what you're asking for, Marie? It does.
That's true. That's true. So my PowerPoint was not reflecting the vote on the scope. So I'll take that. I'll take that request back, and just now we can focus what people feel about requesting some language about requiring a community-wide forum. I had said the reason would be to achieve continuous improvement in community police interactions as the purpose for that hearing. So by that I meant that it's not a vetting session, a gripe session. It's not about particular actions, specific actions that someone may have had that really should have been filed, say, as a complaint. But it's more of a way to be to provide an outlet, but in a way that is productive, in a way that there can be some kind of growth in terms of the trust building relationship between the community and the police. So that's the reasoning behind the proposed language I had added. Now that would be under a subsection 3.
Okay, comments, additions, suggestions?
Jenny has.
Jenny Robinson, board member. I want to say that I do like the definition of the scope of the community-wide forum. Yeah, I like that definition of it.
I saw Stephanie and then Jane.
This board member, Stephanie Littleton, I too like that, and I like this addition, put that to paper, so to speak, in the ordinance, make a stance on it so we can, this is an important initiative. I think it's a really important one, along with the subcommittee that's already starting to work on the community engagement. So I definitely wholeheartedly agree with this.
Board member Jane?
Jane Gibson, board member. I think in principle, it's a great idea. I think in practice, we'll find if you watch the city planning commission meetings and you watch city commission meetings, you'll discover that there is a gripe section, gripe factor, and we're not going to escape that. So I'm certainly willing for us to try this out, and in the spirit of Sanjay's notion that this is a living document, let's give that a try. But we should certainly anticipate that there will be lots of griping as well. We can live with
that. Well, Well, right. I do like, though, the value statement of building, the intent is to build trust. And I think that's real important. Stephanie?
I was just going to add, we haven't had this opportunity yet to do such, and I mean, definitely can build an agenda around it that's going to be, it can be really beneficial, however we want to build that and add to it in this. So there will be some of that no matter what, and you open that up, that we're going to have good intent going forward, right? So that's
okay. Okay, Jane?
Jane Gibson, board member. I just have a procedural question. Are we asking Tony to make all these modifications? Or are you expecting the working group to work on this document with these modifications in it? Or I just want to know who's doing it.
That's a good question.
City Attorney Tony Wheeler, I'd be happy to have our staff work on it and bring a draft back for you all to review to make sure that it's consistent with what your intentions and votes have been. I think, we have perhaps more time to dedicate this, and since it has to be turned around in a fairly short order, it might be easier if we worked on it.
Thank
you. I don't want to overstep.
Oh, no, thank you. That'd be
wonderful. Thank you. Okay. Do we? Yes.
Madam Chair, this is Brandon McGuire, Assistant City Manager. Just
acknowledging the previous discussion about the time and maybe the board's desire to wrap up the meeting before completing a discussion of all of the sections within the ordinance. I wonder if the board's interested in discussing maybe the city attorney staff taking some liberty and working in some of the other minor revisions or section revisions that were discussed in Tony's previous table, and bringing that back in a more comprehensive draft ordinance that the board can then pick up discussion of in their next meeting.
Thank you, Brandon. Stephanie?
This board member, Stephanie Littleton, that is a fantastic idea. I'm completely in agreement with that.
Okay. Here too, Bill?
This board member Greg, I think it's a good idea, but the only thing I would request is the changes to the ordinance that the staff makes, if they could highlight those or some way identify where the changes are, it would be helpful. Thank you.
And this is Brandon McGuire.
Agreed and noted, Bill. Absolutely.
This is Brandon McGuire, Assistant City Manager. I should have also clarified that I assume we will be working based with the baseline document being the subcommittee's working draft.
Yes.
Just to clarify.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Brandon. This is Board Member Salvini. Thank you. At this point, do we need a motion for anything?
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Bill. I saw consensus with Marie's proposal on the annual community-wide forum and to fold that in the document. And if we want to take it out later, fine, but let's go ahead. And I saw consensus among us, or do we have to have a vote? Yeah, Sanjay?
I'm good. I agree. If you want to put it, motion to add a requirement for the board to hold at least one annual community-wide forum. And the purpose is to help us build trust between the community and the police.
Board Marie, sure. Second that.
Okay, there's a motion to add the recommendation from Board Member Taylor on including the specific duties of the board, the one annual community-wide forum in order to build trust. There's the motion by Sanjay, second by Marie. And all those in favor with a yay, all those opposed with a nay. Jane Gibson.
Tanya, may I just suggest that this can be put between 3 and 4, because that seems the most appropriate place where it could go.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Now we agree. Thank you.
For discussion purposes to the city. Okay, perfect. Okay, any more discussion? All right, all those in favor with a yay, all those opposed with a nay. Board Member Gibson?
Yes.
Board Member Marie? Board Member Marie?
Yay. Yes.
Thank you. Okay, got it.
Maybe I should
Okay. Board Member Jenny?
Yay.
Board Member Bill?
Yay.
Board Member Stephanie?
Yay.
Board Member Sanjay?
Yes.
Board Member Salvini, yay. We've got unanimous 7 votes on that motion. Stephanie?
Board member Stephanie Moulton, before you all go, because I know we're kind of moving that, I just kind of wanted to take a step back and go, okay, what do we have left? It looks like the next other big thing looks like qualification. Other than that,
yeah.
I think one of the other big points that was made, maybe for the city staff to consider, is the her or his, the general neutral, and some of the terminology.
That can be all cleaned up. Yeah.
Okay, so am I right in that we're really kind of down to really maybe the qualifications? Okay.
No.
Go ahead, Jane.
Jane Gibson, board member. If we could draw from the table that had all of the issues that all the board members raised in that previous meeting in August. There's the Sanjay's suggestion that and staff suggestion as well, that we break out when we receive annual reports. We wanted a report that went beyond the scope of what the Attorney General requires, and Sanjay suggested we create a second paragraph that broadened so that we could get the rest of the report. And that's gonna maybe I actually have some proposed language I could read or send, or we could wait till the next time. I just don't want us to overlook that. And I also have a question about it, because in Marie's draft, she had suggested, I saw that she had added the word mandatory. And so the question of mandatory annual reports. And my question is, what this does is bind us to receive reports, but I don't see that it binds the police to produce them and deliver them to us. So does the word mandatory help us with that? So that if we want a report that's, as we had discussed, that goes beyond what the current number 5 does the word mandatory also bind the police to provide those reports to us?
Marie Taylor, board member. I was thinking that if we were making a distinction between what is required by the law that they're supposed to produce, then that would be what would be mandatory, and then any other reports that would be required. I don't think that there's much. I think we're all on the same page about that. If there's some information that's now not required to be submitted to the state attorney general's office, that you still want reports, right? I mean, I think that's, and so to me, it's just working out the semantics about how you distinguish between what is the mandatory report that is required by the city for the attorney general's office versus what is specific to meeting the requirements under the ordinance.
Jane?
I didn't actually have my hand up, but thank you, Jane Gibson, board member. Well, there is a distinction, though. The current number 5, I think, is all about racial and bias-based policing, and so what we wanted to do was broaden the scope of the report to include other kinds of complaints. So, if you want to indulge me, I'll just read you. It's 2 sentences. It's 2 sentences that I would suggest for a new. I guess it'll be number 7, because we've added another one for the annual community-wide forum. It would be receive annual reports regarding all community member complaints alleging police misconduct from the police department no later than July 31st of each year. So that's the same, but just broader. Such report shall report the total community member complaints, the number of complaints by categories of bias as defined in this ordinance, the number of complaints for excessive use of force, and the number and kind of any other policing practices alleged in community member complaints. And this was, it does spell out a lot there, and maybe not as we want. But if we want the data, then we have to ask for the data in that form. Otherwise, if we get aggregate data, we won't see what's going on. So I think maybe somebody can improve the language in that, but I do think we need it, and I think we should break out the categories.
I'm in agreement with that as well. I think we want more information than what specifically goes in the, the Attorney General's report, right? Yeah. Okay. So I think our intent here is all on the same, just the same. I don't know about the language, so if that's something, Tony, you could work on as well, and that's the intent of the group.
City Attorney Tony Wheeler, yes, I think we can work, start with Dr. Gibson's language and just work from that.
Okay, perfect.
Please clean up the mess I made of it.
Okay, Marie, yes.
Marie
and then Stephanie.
Board member. So in terms of major components of the ordinance, I think we identified qualifications, but I would also add in what we're allowed to share with the public. So if we're doing all of these complaints, reviews, recommendations, I think we should have a discussion on where are the parameters where we can actually release some form of information. And this is also for board transparency with the public, but also, this also helps the police department as well be more transparent. And so if we could figure out where that line is, and so that if we are doing these recommendations, what aspect of it could be released in a public format with redactions. But I think that we should have some sort of direction so that we're not so bound by confidentiality that it's overbroad in that regard.
I agree, Marie, and that will have to be a discussion certainly that we have and spend a little bit of time on, because we want to protect folks, but at the same time be able to report that information. So, Jane.
Jane Gibson, board member. I would just encourage, if Tony was willing to work on that as well, to look at the language that Marie used there. What she seemed to narrow the scope to, protecting confidential information, and that seems to be appropriate, and it allows us to talk about other things. So maybe that language would be helpful when if you would draft that section for us.
Sure. Actually, I think that is. I think that is a recommendation that Marie has already written on page 8 of your PowerPoint. Would that be correct, Marie? Or similar? Clarify that not only.
It's in her alternative draft in any case.
Yeah, in her alternative, right. Thank you. So it is in there. Okay. Whew. Okay. Jane.
Jane Gibson, could I second Bill's motion that we adjourn?
It is out there, isn't it?
It's just hanging, like a hanging chad.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Is there a discussion? Stephanie.
Board member Stephanie Wilson. I just want to, since we're asking a lot of the city staff, I would ask, in addition to that, maybe if they come back, since we're down to kind of the qualifications for the most part. I think in the comprehensive review, if they would look at what the recommendations are versus what we have, and maybe give us some insight there with where we can or cannot go, that probably will help move us forward on that one as well.
I agree, Stephanie. Sanjay? And then Marie?
Can I make a suggestion that Marie's PowerPoint slide be included in the agenda items so we can do the comparison, because there are still a few things. I think 3-4 slides, 7, 8, 9, 10 that we still have to work through. So they be attached to the next agenda.
Sanjay, you mean the city staff or?
No, they be attached. So when we want to access that, it's there in the agenda for next week.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Sanjay. Marie?
Marie Taylor, board member. So I would suggest that only the slides dealing with the qualifications.
Okay. And that would be, number 9, page 9.
Right. Just
Okay, thank you.
And just from my Marie Taylor board member, my research, it looked like the city's ordinance was nearly verbatim to what was the ordinance used to form the Wichita Civilian Police Review Board. So in my mind, that does not mean that Lawrence necessarily has to have the same qualifications that may have been okay for Wichita, may not work for Lawrence. I've been scouting around for different boards' versions of how they qualify, and it really is, to me, an area where we could craft our own version that speaks to Lawrence. So just keep that in mind. Yeah, I don't think anyone's prepared to have that discussion. It's late tonight, but to think through what it means and the significance of that. And also remember that was specifically one of the items that the city commission asked us to look at. They didn't, they specifically wanted us to look at requirements. So I think that it does deserve its own dedicated time to discuss in depth.
Okay, noted. Thank you, Marie. Stephanie.
Board Member Stephanie Littleton, I just want to make a comment that I do want to apologize, Marie and Jenny and Sanjay. I really had hoped that we would get to getting some minutes from the initial meeting, because I've read through that and you really made some strides. So I'd asked that we place this on the agenda for the top of the agenda for our next meeting. If I understand, if we're not doing training, that, if we're going to place on agenda, this needs to be on the top, and then the qualifications and such, so we can get some feedback on this.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. Okay, Marie and Sanjay.
Just to clarify, for my slides, it's slides 9 and 10.
10, right. Thank you. Sanjay.
Sanjay Mishra, board member. I wanted to check if this is the time we need to get a new chair. Yes, Bill.
I call for the question. There's a motion on the floor.
Okay.
Okay. Call for the question. All those in favor of before we go, I want to thank the staff. Thank you so much, Tony and Randy. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And Brandon, you too. Okay, before we sign off.
Yes, Madam Chair.
All those in favor?
Chair.
Yes.
This is Assistant City Manager
McGuire. I do want to clarify that the Deputy Attorney General was planning on conducting the training with the board next week at their meeting.
The date?
And so I want to clarify whether or not the board wishes to continue with that plan or try to reschedule that training for a different date.
Bill, can I speak?
Yes, go ahead, Sanjay.
So I was going to ask, how long will he take? Or will they take? Sorry. How long will they take?
This is Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. We had previously discussed splitting the training, which I believe is about approximately 3 hours total, into 2 sessions. And so we have already had 2 meetings scheduled for October. And so it would be approximately an hour and a half next Thursday.
Yep, I'm fine.
Okay, so
I'm fine. Bring it on. Yes.
So the issue is, do we want to address the community engagement meeting minutes prior to the training briefly?
The recommendation be afterwards. We're having an outside.
Bill?
Ask him when is the best time, when the Deputy Attorney General has agreed to go.
After the training.
Bill?
I'd be in favor of having the training next week, because to the delight of all, I will probably be out of town. So,
thank you, Bill.
But you can call in. This is web-based, so you can call in wherever you are.
You can do it on your phone. So Brandon, is that just, would it be okay then, I mean, in terms of time and effort, if we did go ahead and address the community engagement prior to the training?
This is Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. I think if the discussion is fairly brief, discussing the community engagement subcommittee meeting first would be appropriate. But I will say that the Deputy Attorney General is doing this as a courtesy and as a sort of a volunteer opportunity for us. And so we wouldn't want to keep her waiting too terribly long.
Right.
No, I think we at the back end.
Okay. All right.
Absolutely.
I agree. Marie? Mm-hmm.
Marie Taylor, board member, I would say, yeah, put it on the back end and it can wait to another.
Okay.
Like at the beginning, I think it can wait to. It was more information. It was an informational meeting, so I just wanted to make sure you all had the information that we learned, because I thought it was really valuable. So it's not for any action item, and the longer you have to kind of mull it over and then think of questions for us, I think that's fine. I don't think it's immediately pressing.
Oh, we have a question.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Okay, that question has been called. All those in favor of adjournment signify with an aye. Jane?
Aye.
Marie?
Marie Taylor, aye.
Jennifer?
Aye.
Bill?
Aye.
Sante?
Aye.
Stephanie?
Aye.
Tanya, aye. Okay. All right. Thank you all
Thank you
again
all.
for
Good night, everybody. Yes.
this wonderful work. We're getting there. We're closer. Thank you all so much, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Good
Bye-bye.
work. Yes, Stephanie, Jane, Bill, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Marie, everyone, thank you.
Good night.
Thank you. I was like, thank you. I was like, in my mind.